let's get started.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining. This is our second webinar since the summer break. We took a little 3-week break there. Overall, these remote game studio webinars, or the remote webinars in general, have been a big success. And so thank you everybody for joining today. And thank you everybody who's joined in the past. You know, if you're watching this recorded, thanks for all the people who've watched the recorded webinars as well. So today, here with Patrick Palm, founder and CEO of Favro. Thanks, Patrick, for joining. And we're gonna start things off with Patrick giving us kind of his vision of Favro and a little bit of the origin story of how Favro came to be.
All right, and you know, sorry for the casual clothing here today. I was just getting in from not a run, but a fast walk, and I had a business meeting at the same time. It feels very, very Corona times. You know, right now everyone is kind of working in sweatpants or you know, from really anywhere. And you know, that's one of the advantages of, you know, what's going on now. But you know, to go into John's question there on, you know, the origin story of Favro or Favro, we obviously didn't anticipate a Corona, but some of the things we did anticipate and foresee have been speeded up by what's going on with Corona. And the background to why we started this company, you know, launched this in 2016, is that my two fellow co-founders and I, we had started and built another company called Handsoft, where you know, it's a platform for scaling agile software development, you know, to very, you know, large teams, and you know, with many customers in game development also. And you know, this was an on-prem solution, and you know, we sold this company back in 2017 to an American company, and we did that to be able to focus very much on what we're doing here with Favro. And Favro basically builds upon, you know, 3 ideas. And the first one is that we learned, or we saw, that this kind of agile way of working is going to cross over to any kind of team. And it's going to be you know, even more important to break down the organizational silos. So you can say it's more important to be agile, you know, between many teams than maybe necessarily to have, you know, another tool, another process making things a little bit better within the specific team. So a classic example here is product development versus marketing. And you know, for all of you who, you know, now, especially during Corona, might have slightly bigger challenges, you know, with this kind of collaboration to make, you know, live ops successful, or even releasing a new game, you know, being really, really good at business agility across the whole organization. That was our kind of bigger goal, and the reason why we wanted to create, you know, this product. And we could start with a blank sheet and look at, okay, with everything, you know, with all of this in mind, what would a tool for this look like? And that was the origin of Favro. There were 2 more ideas. You know, one is, you know, today most companies have gone cloud, but the trend that we're seeing right now is that companies want enterprise level security, even if they're on the cloud. So vendors that can provide that kind of level, and we're one of them, you know, is high in demand. But also data governance, and obviously that has accelerated lately with GDPR, you know, and the court ruling this summer, as you probably know about, with, you know, new laws in California, and in South America. So the whole question around data governance is much more than just GDPR. It is kind of exploding everywhere. And we, with Favro, you know, we are the tool vendor that can provide companies that really care about this with an opportunity to basically comply in, you know, in their end, in this kind of whole, you know, chain of compliance. And so that was like the second idea, you know, that this should be, you know, an enterprise grade platform, but with a gamer grade user experience. And the final idea that we had behind this is that we see organizations as being very organic. I mean, what most companies are trying to do today is to move towards more autonomous teams, and you want to have these autonomous teams, but at the same time, you want alignment, but you don't want alignment in the historical way, with command and control and very process centric. So we wanted to build a tool which is, both so agile that it bends to the needs of every different kind of team and provide that autonomy, but at the same time aligns in a modern way, towards the company goals. And with this takes into account the fact that everything tends to just move around and to be quite organic rather than static. So that was like the third idea we had in mind. How do we design for this? And this is basically the origin story of Favro. And we launched in 2016, got clients across many different industries. But game developers are definitely one of the industries that have been very fast to pick up Favro, not only in their development teams, but across the whole studio, for marketing, for even for HR and onboarding and all those kind of things as well.
That's right. Well, thanks, Patrick. And I think that's very true. I mean, I work with a lot of Favro customers as an Agile coach, and everyone that I speak with, game studios and other industries, they love the flexibility, and that's just something that you don't get with other tools. They can be so prescriptive, so rigid. And those three kind of design pillars that you just spoke about, I think are so important, because you have that security, but you also have that flexibility and the ability to have alignment across the entire studio without forcing a particular process or a particular way of working across the entire studio. And I think that's what makes Favro so unique. So thanks for that. On another note, but also related to game industry, game studios, I know that you are also an angel investor. So in that regard, would you mind sharing some kind of insights as to what you look for when you make angel investments?
Yeah, so I have a small investment company on the side. I mean, we all got different hobbies, and this is my. And I've done 13 direct angel investments so far, and I'm also limited partner in 3 funds. And Play Ventures is one of them, which is a venture capital company exclusively focused on the game development industry, and those guys are absolutely amazing. So what I look at, and the last 2 investments I've done are in the game industry, and actually I would say a relatively large part of my investments are in the game industry, and that's both studios and game tech. And the last 2 ones is 1 studio and 1 game tech. And I have 2 kind of main criteria. You also have to remember that as an angel investor, you're not able to spend the amount of time on looking into these companies as an institutional investor like a venture capital company would do. So you need to make much riskier bets, and you typically do much earlier. So it is definitely much more on the high risk side. And I'm normally one of the first checks that the company gets, or maybe even the first check. What I look for, so I have 2 main criteria. So the first one is that they're trying to do something that I think is bound to happen anyways. Something which is this must happen. And the second criteria is really, is this a team that I believe in? Will be, is this the horse I want to bet on to be a winner in that thing that must happen? And then of course I look at the execution plan, but in many ways that is a function of the team. To be honest, if you have a really good team, you're going to figure out the execution. So of course I look at the execution plan, and sometimes I can contribute with advice on these things, but and if I don't agree with execution plan at all, I mean, maybe then it's not a great match. But again, these 2 first criteria are the important ones. And if we look then at the 2 last investments I've done, So one of them is a company called Simple, Israeli-based company, uses artificial intelligence, or machine learning in this case, to it's basically a machine teaching the machine. So one of the great things when you build a game is that when you start having a lot of players, you will get a lot of data. You can do a lot of A/B testing, so forth. But what if you can predict the monetary outcome of some of these basically feature A/B tests before you even done them? That would be pretty fantastic. And with the right technology, you can. So in many ways, this is basically a machine teaching the machine, which is an idea in general that I'm a big believer in. And the team behind this have a strong background. As many probably know, the Israeli tech ecosystem is very strong on artificial intelligence in general. And this is something that I saw was an interesting match. The other case is a company called Return. It's an Icelandic Finnish company, and it's quite secretive so far, so I can't really say too much. But it's a very interesting space within cloud native gaming, and this is something which is definitely happening. There's going to be a lot of really nice companies built in this. One of the more high profile ones recently that got a lot of investment was Mainframe, and the person who was the chairman of Mainframe up until this big American investment came in is also the founder of this company, and he also happens to be one of the co-founders of Remedy, which is definitely one of the best game developers who ever came out of Finland. So again, you have the same thing, within the space of what kind of games and how to play the game. It is something which is bound to happen. I absolutely think this is a winning part of the industry. Is this the right person and team to be a winner in that space? Absolutely. I love these guys. So there you have the magic. And to be honest, it's not really that much more complicated. And to be honest, I would not have the time to evaluate so much more than those things. And then of course, we sit down and look at plans, and if there's a playable, of course, I play and so forth. But doing the kind of deep DD and all those kind of things that an institutional investor can do, I don't do. And also, to be honest, you don't really have much to DD at this super early stage. Now, then you have maybe some of you listening say, well, what about, how do you negotiate valuation and things like that? And the easiest way around that is to use the Y Combinator safe note. Then you get away from that whole problem. So, if you don't know what a safe note is, just read up on it. It's a great instrument for investing, and you can take the whole negotiation around valuation stuff, out of it.
Excellent. So now I know. Now everybody else knows what you're looking for. So send your pitches to Patrick. And I'm hoping that these two startups that you just spoke of, I hope they also use Favro. I think.
Yeah. I mean, I actually know for a fact that the latter one I spoke about, the studio, they are. And I also know that they're very happy. At least they told me they're very happy. It almost sounded like surprised, because that's a fun thing, I think, with startups. We actually have a lot of startups, especially within games, that are using Favro. But it's almost like binary. Some startups are like, why do we need a tool for collaboration? We just talk to each other. I think most of those might have realized now during Corona, you have to work remote, that you probably need to have a tool. But then you have the other half, which is like, hey, we want to build like a serious company from day one, and then we need to make sure that we have the best, most agile tool for game development out there, and that's Favro. So they also very happy. They don't want to buy a super heavy, complex, hard to learn kind of tool that everyone will hate, and they shouldn't. But the thing, as John, Favro is really designed, with scaling from that startup to thousands and thousands of users, and some of our clients have thousands and thousands of users. So it's so when you become really big, you shouldn't buy one of those old-fashioned tools either. this is what Favro is designed for, to scale as you scale.
Scale more naturally, more organically, not in some prescriptive heavyweight way. So yeah, thanks, Patrick. And of course, that brings us, was there anything else you'd like to add before we jump into? Okay, great, thank you. And as Patrick said, when you have a smaller team, whether it's a studio or a tech startup, whatever the case may be, and you're used to maybe working in Slack and then talking to each other, being co-located, that's obviously, for most places in the world, not really an option right now. So that's why we started doing these remote game studio webinars. And as Patrick says, you might have been able to get away with just a tool like Slack and email even before Slack to run your company, to run your studio, and then just talk to each other. But now, even for a small operation, that's not possible. And you really need some sort of a planning and collaboration tool like Favro. So let's kind of hear what we're here to talk about. And I'm going to share my screen. Again, thanks, Patrick, for joining us.
All right, thanks, John. I'll see you soon again.
Okay, take care.
All right,
Bye, Patrick.
See you. All right.
Okay, so getting into kind of more of the root of what we're going to talk about today, we are presenting again out of Favro, showing the flexibility of the tool. We found it's actually easier to present these webinars out of Favro than it is out of PowerPoint or Google Slides, and I don't have to jump back and forth between the two to show what I want to show. So here is an example of a Favro timeline view. The boards, there's 3 different views of all the boards: Kanban view, a Sheets view, and a timeline view like this. And we'll see all of these as I'm going through the webinar. So here is our agenda. We had Patrick join us. So again, thanks, Patrick, for taking the time. Highly appreciated. Now we're going to jump into the core meat of the webinar, the remote game studio. So let me open up this board. What we're looking at here is different Favro boards. Over here on the left are what we call Favro collections. So each collection is exactly that. It's a single screen collection of multiple boards and backlogs. So typically this would be a Kanban board type of view where you're going from to do, to doing, to done, maybe some more detailed, elaborate process flowing from left to right. But here, you can use a board for anything you want. So we're going to start out with some inspiration. And when the pandemic first hit and Patrick and I were talking, a lot of the things that were happening in the world were called out right away by Martin Miko, CEO of HackerOne. He also happens to be a Favro investor. And he wrote this open letter essentially to the world about remote work and the way HackerOne had basically worked from day one. So he had this quote, which really resonated with me and inspired me to start doing these remote work webinars. The Industrial Revolution brought us the idea that work is a place different from home and that work is done in physical proximity of many other people. It is the idea of the joint workplace that is the anomaly. Working from home is natural. So think about that, right? We have this kind of Industrial Revolution hangover where people had to physically work in the same space in factories. Knowledge work is not that. Knowledge work is not a factory. So the idea that everybody has to be in a co-located space is, especially in an open plan office, so to say, is really kind of outdated. And the other reason for that is, and this quote here captures it perfectly from Jason Fried and David Hansen, who wrote the book Remote, all the way back in 2013. So they were kind of ahead of the game. But their company, 37 Signals, kind of works the same way. These guys are the makers of Basecamp. So what they say, offices have become interruption factories. The ability to be alone with your thoughts is, in fact, one of the key advantages of working remotely. And I've been working remote for years now, and I absolutely agree with this. The last time I worked in an actual office environment was back in my electronic arts days, and we were sitting in an open planned office. It was very difficult to concentrate. It was very difficult to get work done. Tons of interruptions. You have to have those unbroken periods, interruption-free periods, to really get the real work done. And I found that to just not be possible in an office type environment, especially an open plan office type environment. And I think that's, in game studios, I really do kind of think that's one of the reasons, one of the contributors to the crunch factor, or so much overtime. I mean, a lot of the real work takes place after hours. A lot of the real work actually happens before hours or at home. So now everybody's working remotely. I think they're seeing the advantage of that. And the polls have shown that people do appreciate at least the option to be able to work remotely. So let's talk about some of the benefits, some of the obvious benefits of having a remote studio as opposed to a physical space co-located studio. And right off the bat, lower overhead, it's obvious. Reduced office space, or no office space even, no studio physical space. It's just a huge savings. All the ancillary things that go along with that: no staff, no security staff, no maintenance, the insurance that goes into that, the utilities, so on and so forth. You're also going to have to deal with less travel. People are kind of used to now, obviously, meeting on Zoom. Obviously, you're missing out on some of the benefits of that face-to-face communication, but Zoom is an amazing tool and it seems to work great. We're obviously on Zoom right now. Another benefit of the remote studio is the best talent. I mean, you don't have to recruit people and maybe have to convince them to relocate to LA. Or maybe you can only draw out of the current LA talent pool. Now that's just not an issue anymore. Regardless of where you are in the world, right? You can collaborate, you can work together to make the best possible games, and you can find the best possible talent regardless of physical geographic location. Related to that is this whole idea of diversity. And diversity, of course, you're making games now, not just for the core gamer, you're making games for the entire world. All different regions, all different genders. And having that diversity on your team is more and more important to make products for the entire world as opposed to just your typical core gamer. And kind of to illustrate this point, I have a little example here. And this is also to get across that Favro is really not, as Patrick said, is not just for game development proper. It's not just for feature creation, game mechanics, art assets. Of course, you can do all of those things and Favro do them very well, but it's really meant to run your entire studio, including HR and recruiting. So we have this example here of running your recruitment Kanban, your recruitment flow in Favro. So we can see these are all the resumes we selected for a certain open position. These are maybe all of our open positions down here. These are the people that made it to the screening call, the team interview, reference check, and eventually who got hired. So a very simple example, but again, really shows off the flexibility, the power of the tool to really run your entire studio, from live ops, as Patrick said, to your game development, to the HR and recruiting like we're seeing here. So one of the biggest things for me from a benefit perspective is happier people and happier teams made up of those happier people. And this is something as an Agile coach that I've been a proponent of for a long time, is putting more of a focus on individual and team happiness, whether that you're using happiness metrics or Kaizen backlogs and boards. This whole idea of continuous improvement for the better, really fostering this idea of it's the team first, and the team's happiness should come first, because happier teams, it's just been proven time and time again, lead to increased creativity and productivity. And as I said, the polls are showing that the vast majority of people like this working from home deal. Obviously, it was more of a necessity than an opportunity, but they like at least, over 50% of people polled like at least the opportunity to be able to work remotely. They might not want to work remotely all the time as things return to hopefully normal, but they do like the flexibility that remote work offers. Better work-life balance, better family time, as long as they can control, which they do have more control of rather than an open plan office, they have more control of the interruptions that maybe surround them at home. Here is a quick example of a Kaizen type of setup in Favro. So we have a team here running the retrospective out of Favro. Why use another tool? You know, do the retrospectives as well as your actual development in the tool at the team level. So you're running your retrospective. Those retrospectives are leading to improvement items. Those improvement items are being fed into this Kaizen backlog. You can't do everything at once, so you kind of prioritize what are the improvement items we should do first. And then just as you would commit backlog items from your feature backlog or art asset backlog to a board, a Kanban board or a sprint board, you do the same thing at the beginning of each iteration. These are the improvement items that we committed to in the last retrospective. Let's drag those from the backlog onto this Kaizen board, and you're tracking, you know, the improvement items the same way you're tracking your actual user stories or features or art assets. All right, and one of the other really obvious, and this of course really leads to the individual and team happiness, is no commuting. This can't be understated enough, right? So it's just crazy that, especially in the US, the average office worker spends 300 to 400 hours per year commuting. And with the move to remote work, that's all time you get back, whether it's productivity time, work time, or, you know, hopefully it's just more free time to do what you actually want to do, as opposed to sitting in a car stuck in traffic like you see in this image here. So some of the challenges, you know, there's obviously some challenges too to this remote way of working. And one of the things that I hear quite often is, are we going to lose our studio culture? And I honestly think that this could be an opportunity to improve your studio culture. You might be lucky enough to work for a studio that has a strong, kind of open, transparent, maybe even agile, maybe even was remote and distributed first before the pandemic. But one of the things I've realized working with studios since the pandemic is that this move to remote is going to amplify both the strengths and weaknesses of your studio and your studio culture. And some of those, you know, strengths might have been you had kind of a very open, transparent, you trusted your people. There was a lot of autonomy, a lot of responsibility given out to the individuals and the teams. But if you didn't have that, right, those are weaknesses. If it was very command and control, very hierarchical, very kind of task driven, that's just not going to work in a remote and distributed team. So hopefully, if you were in that type of situation, this is an opportunity to improve those weaknesses, because, you know, they're just not going to fly in a remote studio environment. So ditch the command and control, you know, kind of flatten the organization as much as possible, everything we talk about in Agile. Increase your transparency, increase your accountability, and really start to think like a remote first studio, and maybe, you know, hopefully an Agile remote first studio. I should call out that on each and every one of these cards, we've added both the examples that I've been clicking on, these Favro cards, and also some kind of articles. This one here, the Favro Remote Work Playbook, Patrick and I wrote to help studios, to help businesses in general, make that move to remote. And this is based on our experience and Favro's experiences of being a remote first organization. Okay, another one, right? Are people working? So this is, especially in the first days of moving to remote, this was a big concern. And the original instinct was to, we've got to find a way to track people. We've got to find a way to make sure that people are working. And there was lots of talk of, you know, hour tracking, activity tracking, tracking how long they were online, tracking the number of tasks done. You know, don't do that. You shouldn't have been doing that that before people move to remote, and you certainly shouldn't be doing it now. Rather than tracking tasks and tracking activity, you want to be tracking the flow of value through your organization, through your studio, whether that's user stories, whether that's features, whether that's art assets. You want to be tracking that flow of value instead of tracking the people on, the Agile kind of analogy used here is in a relay race, keep your eyes on the baton, not the runners, because it's that baton getting around the track 4 times that's going to win the race for you. So that's the same concept of tracking the flow of value in your studio. If you're so concerned with making sure that the runners, the individual contributors, are always busy, that's just going to cause burnout. Imagine a runner gets to the end of his lap of the baton race, of the relay race, and he instantly has to run another race. That's just not going to work. You're not going to get the best from those runners. You're not going to get the best from those people. There has to be slack in any system in order for it to be optimized. And I don't mean Slack, the tool that everybody uses. I mean actual free time, some slack time in the system to make improvements, to have that downtime, to not burn out. So another example here, again, in the tool, say you have an app team. It's maybe a game app or it's a supporting app, and a relatively small team. And instead of tracking, how under or over allocated each one of these team members are on this team, you're rather just looking at their Kanban board, and you're turning on in Favro these Kanban flow-based metrics that are saying, okay, for stats tracking for this particular design iPhone login screen in this example, how long has this been? What's the overall lead time? So how long since it entered this board has it been on this board? And of course, demo data here, but you can tell that this particular card has been in development for 42 days. And the time in column is showing you, are things stuck at a particular stage? So for example, stats tracking has been stuck in test for 6 days. Why is that? So again, instead of looking at the people tasking the people, how busy they are, just track the flow of value, and Favro makes that very simple by turning on these Agile metrics, these flow-based metrics, time on board and time in column, otherwise known as lead time and cycle time. You can also, built into every every board, you have these valuable charts, burn down charts, cumulative flow diagrams, and control charts showing you that flow of value over time. So the simplest one, of course, burn down chart. What's our velocity on every day, and how are we tracking towards completing everything we may be committed to in a sprint as this team is working, or in an iteration or a release based on that calculated velocity. Again, that's automatically built into every board. You don't have to do anything or pay for an extra add-on to get that like you would with other tools. So back to our challenges, another one that comes up all the time, especially with the move to remote, is too many meetings. And a big reason for that, and this is what comes from a studio that I'm working with as a coach, is that it's not that too many meetings are really the problem. They're a symptom of the real problem. And the real problem is that there's probably, again, speaking back to those studio cultural weaknesses, there's probably an overall lack of direction and clear goals. People don't know what it is they're supposed to be working on a day-to-day basis. So they have to have a meeting to find out, and it's all too often too many people are invited to that meeting to find out what it is, what are the goals, what is the direction, what is the vision of the game, or what is the vision of the maybe minimum lovable feature we're working on in this particular iteration. You also don't have visibility. You're probably trying to, I've worked with studios that are trying to do everything out of Slack, right? Or even worse, email. And they don't have visibility to that work in progress. They can't see their art assets flowing from left to right on a Kanban board that everybody can see. They can't see what's been committed to the current sprint from a feature development standpoint. And they can't see maybe the burn down, whether they're tracking towards completion or not on time. And there's really no way of communicating where the work is actually flowing. So you're trying to, number one, you maybe can't even see the work flowing, right? So you don't know when things are getting stuck, but you also can't communicate where the work is flowing. And in Favro, you can do that. Don't use Slack to have those conversations. Have those conversations directly on the cards, which you can do in Favro, where the work is actually happening. That's going to vastly reduce your meetings. Collaboration and innovation. Can we innovate? Can we continue to be as creative as we were? Can we innovate gameplay? Is our teams going to be able to collaborate? And the answer is absolutely yes, right? Especially if you have the right lightweight agile processes and planning and collaboration tools. And here's another example in Favro. We'll go to just a feature team, and they have maybe their feature backlog, and that backlog is driving maybe a feature roadmap like this, and their current sprint. What have they committed to in the sprint backlog for this particular team? And so I have an example here of what if they have a blocking issue? Say somebody is working on this particular take cover behind objects, and they realize, okay, I'm blocked. So they could just maybe move that from testing to block. It's automatically going to tag it as blocked, assign maybe the scrum master or the person leading the team lead, to resolve that impediment. And because of the nature of Favro, the ability to have the same cards in multiple places, they could simply just take this take cover behind objects. What's the block? We need a block model to hide behind to test this thing. Here's the conversation, as I said previously. Have the conversation where, maybe asynchronously or even in real time, where the work is happening. So there's always a record of it tied to the work. How did this block develop, and how is this block eventually resolved? So the person responsible for getting this removing this block, this impediment, could simply take this card, for example, and they might have the art asset teams board and their same collection, and they could just drag and drop it from here to here, and you can see that stayed in both places. And now the art asset team is going to see, okay, we have a blocked feature. We're blocking a feature. They can open this up. They're doing feature-driven development, and they could say, okay, well, we should swarm this. You know, this should become our highest priority thing to create this block model, whatever that block model may be, to remove this impediment. And they can just, again, move this through as quickly as possible. Maybe they only needed to get to the model stage to get this thing done. And then via the comments here, say, this has been fixed, or this is ready, something like this. And then this could move back to testing and continue on through to producer review and so on and so forth. Okay, so some solutions to these challenges, right, other than the ones we've already given. So you have to adopt, the most important thing, you can have all the best practices, all the best processes, tools in the world, but it's not going to work unless you have this remote first studio culture. You've got to get rid of the command and control, like I said before. You've got to start thinking, we trust our individual contributors, we trust the developers, we trust the artists, and accordingly, those individual contributors have to be held accountable, and they have to start to think more like studio owners, independent developers, as opposed to an employee in maybe a large organization. And the actual leaders in the studio have to really adopt this idea of servant leadership, which is another very strong agile concept, where you're there to not tell people what to do and how to do it. You're there to provide direction, that clear direction. These are the features that we're working on this particular iteration or release, and this is why. And then trust the people that you've hired, to make that happen, make it happen. If there's impediments, if there's blocks, the servant leader is there to remove those impediment and blocks. And that's what a leader is in a remote first agile organization. For those individual contributors, right, for the individual developers, for the individual QA people, whatever the role is within the studio, there's no studio to show up to anymore for most places, for most studios. So it's about adding value, and that's how you show up. So again, thinking like a business owner, a studio owner, as opposed to an employee. So you've always got to be adding that value and making that value visible, which is much easier to do with a tool like Favro. And of course, you've got to have another kind of core agile pillar, is this idea of transparency, along with the inspect and adapt. And you've got to have that transparency and visibility across the entire studio. And I have an example of that here, where maybe you have using the power to have the boards and backlogs from multiple teams and multiple collections on a single screen collection in Favro. You can create an overall studio dashboard like I'm showing here. So here in this studio dashboard, this might be something that, as you can see, this is open to the entire organization. Anybody can come in here and see what are the main things that are driving the studio. These are all the studio's actual business initiatives. So maybe they have 2 live games currently in development, or maybe they're not live yet, whatever the case may be. They have some high-level strategy, some new IP stuff that they're thinking about doing. All the things that run the business, maybe find a larger studio is something they're going to do now with the remove to remote. But this might turn into buy remote equipment for people working from home, whatever the case may be. And then there might be recruitment initiatives, and those exist because they can exist on multiple places on a studio roadmap like this. So Agent 42, for example, we could just take that, drag that on here and slide that around on the timeline. And this is going to kind of give a visual indicator of when these things are happening. And as I said before, you can switch any view in Favro, any table, any board in Favro to the 3 multiple views. So you can look at it as a Kanban board like this, saying, we're actually going to do this, recruit 5 concept artists in Q2. Or we could also look at it as a sheet like this and add columns on the fly, just as you would in Google Sheets. So this one probably makes more sense to look at as a timeline by default, but you can look at it and switch those views on the fly any way you like. We've also pulled in the live backlogs to our 2 games that are currently in development. The Agent 42 feature backlog, where we can see exactly, just without even going to the boards or going to the individual team collections in Favro, we can see a high level of where do each one of these features that are currently in development sit. This one's blocked, this is done, this is in progress, and we don't have to leave the studio dashboard single screen to do that. The same thing for this other game that's in development. We can see their backlog, and again, thanks to relations, we can see exactly where each one of these gameplay mechanics, these driving mechanics, exist in development and when they're scheduled for release. Now, if I close the backlogs, we've got the same thing. Maybe you've got a studio portfolio Kanban where all of those initiatives from the high-level backlog are flowing through what's called a studio portfolio Kanban. So we can see from a high level where do these things sit. And with that whole idea of transparency, everybody in the organization can see this, even remotely. And then you might have the release plans for each one of your games currently in development. Again, you could switch these to different views like this. Okay, so as far as the solutions go, it really boils down to culture, process, and tools. So from a process perspective, if you weren't agile before the pandemic, before the move to remote, you have to be now. Agile has always been about responding to change, inspect and adapt, being adaptable in general. And studio agility, as Patrick mentioned in the beginning of this webinar, is ultra important now. It's not just agility at the team level, which so many studios that I've worked with have, adopted Agile or some hybrid of Agile way of working at the team level, but it's never, really moved past the team level to teams of teams, to programs, to product, all the way up to true business studio agility. And to really function in a remote environment, that's overall studio agility, tying in live ops, tying in marketing, having it all flow organically together is so important. And that's really, from my experience, only achievable with a flexible tool like Favro. Another thing that's really going to reduce your meetings is having an overall very visible studio cadence. So we're going to have a daily stand-up at the team level. We're going to have every 2 weeks an overall game review at the studio level, or maybe at the teams of teams level. And then every month or 2 months, we're going to have a studio town hall meeting remote for maybe multiple projects, multiple games across the entire studio. So you got to have those set sync points at the team level, at the IP level, and then at the overall studio level. We talked about this a little bit, but having a way to visualize that studio flow. So how do things flow from the top down, you know, from an idea at the leadership level, all the way through down to the IP level, the product level, all the way through down to the team level, and then again, all the way back up. And you can do that and have that visibility in a tool like Favro. And of course, to make all of this work, especially working remote, another very agile concept is the self-managed, self-organizing teams. So put a lot of that production burden on the teams themselves, right? They're gonna work, they're gonna feel much more integrated, engaged in the process, in the development, if they feel that ownership, right? They're maybe given the vision, the direction, and then they have that ownership. They're self-managed as a team to make that happen. And then again, as we looked at a little bit, focus on not only the team flow-based metrics, but the overall studio flow-based metrics. And there's this whole other idea of value-based metrics, outcomes and impacts and all of those type of things, and measuring that as opposed to, you know, how busy are we, or how under or over allocated are our individual contributors. So here's an example. I do a lot of agile coaching for game studios as well. Here's an example of my very simple framework. So I'm helping one studio come up with their own framework now, a very lightweight agile framework specific to them, to make things happen, to make this work, this kind of remote first way of working work for them. So from a tool standpoint, so Zoom, obviously everybody's using Zoom for their synchronous live meetings like we're doing right now. Slack for the asynchronous general discussions. Some are even trying to run, you know, the entire studio out of a Slack and combine with Zoom. But it's really a challenge. It's very difficult to find what you're looking for, especially things related to individual art assets or features. When you go back into Slack to try to find out what happened or when were these decisions made and by who. But in Favro, you can not only plan, collaborate, see the flow of value, but you can also communicate. And I think this is very important, as I said before, where the work is happening. So when people go back to find, you know, they come in after the fact asynchronously to see what happened with a particular art asset, how did it get stuck, or how was an impediment removed? They can see it there related to the card. And they also know, you know, they can chime in on the decision specific to the card, whether it represents an art asset or a gameplay mechanic feature. So I have an example of this here. So here we have an art dashboard. So this would be an art director type of view, maybe creative director, or maybe a character lead, whatever the case may be, depending on how big your team is. And he can track everything from this dashboard. He might have his backlog broken down into internal assets, then broken down into different releases, kind of release or content drop bundles for those different asset types. And the same thing for assets that are being worked on by an external team, maybe an outsourced team. So the point we want to get across here is that you can track things in multiple levels. So here we're looking at the actual content drops on this board here, on the art release deliverables, like this. How is the high level flowing? And those break down into the actual individual art assets, which would exist on this Kanban board here. So we take maybe character agent 11 and move it onto this board, and you can see it now exists in both places. And thanks to relations, we can see when it moves to sketch. We can see when it moves to illustration directly from the backlog. And this backlog, of course, could be shared across multiple collections, maybe even up to the studio level if the studio as a whole needs to see this backlog and where each one of these content drops are at, and each one of these individual art assets. Okay, I just want to, getting towards the end here, I just want to call out that before the lockdown, before everything pandemic-wise happened, I was traveling a ton, obviously not traveling now, but one of the cool things Favro had me do, contracted me to do, was a series of interviews with some of the top game producers in the world, really. And these were live face-to-face interviews, again, before the pandemic. Really success stories of producers and their experiences with Favro and leading teams with Favro. And all of those can be seen here on this link, learn.favro.com customer stories. All these interviews are up live on that page. So please do check those out when you have the time. Again, getting to the end, in partnership with Favro, my company, Broadcove Insights, we put together a Favro Remote Quick Start. We have a 5-day version. We also have the 3-day version for teams that really want to make the effective move to remote as quickly and seamlessly as possible, with Favro driving and becoming that single source of truth. If you click on this here, you'll see everything that's included. So right off the top, 25% Favro annual discount, which is a huge cost savings for teams moving to remote. We sit with you, we figure out how your teams are structured, how your studio is structured. We try to optimize that before you do anything in the tool, before you set up any Favro groups, Favro tags, Favro collections, dashboards, or even your workflows. And we help you map all of that out, of course, remotely. And really optimize your setup. We do all this custom design and configuration for you, of course, working with you. Another big value of going with this remote quick start package is we do the integrations for you too. So if you're using Slack, if you're using Jira, still for maybe reporting, if you're using GitHub, G Suite, etc., all those native integrations exist in Favro. And we help set those up even at the board and backlog level, so you don't have to. Again, that's a big part of the value of going with this remote quick start, not having to worry about this. Also included is we'll migrate from whatever, if you are migrating from another tool, we'll help with that migration and migrate that data into Favro. It's a pretty seamless process, but we take care of it for you. And then there's also included in this 1 day of training, the Favro Platform Master Training and Certification for up to 9 people in your studio. So this is a full kind of train the trainer, everything there is to know about Favro administration, about Favro collections, boards, backlogs, workflows, all the capabilities of the tool. At the end, every single attendee who passes the sample project gets a digital badge certification, also a digital certificate, which can be shared, of course, in LinkedIn or anywhere else for, again, up to 9 attendees. Really kind of indicating that you know everything there is to know about the Favro planning and collaboration platform and are now certified to go out and train internal people in your organization. Here is the manage from start to finish timeline for those 3 days. First, the design, the integrations, the migration on the first day. There's an overall communications plan for the entire studio that's included. The training mostly takes place on the second day for that Favro Platform Master, and then there is some individual contributor training, a very short session on the second day. Then the launch, and then there's success tracking to see are people using the tool and how they're using the tool, again, which can be done directly in Favro. So really a huge value, a very, very quick way to fully optimize Favro and make that remove to remote more seamless. Okay, well, thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take those now. And as questions come in, because we've run slightly over time, as questions come in, I'm going to be adding them to this board here, and I'm going to be sharing out the entire collection that we used for this webinar to all the people who registered, and even all the people who registered for the on-demand version. We'll get a shared public version of this collection. And again, All of these cards are clickable if you want to look at any of the shared articles, videos, and of course, the examples. So again, thank you very much for everyone who attended. Highly appreciate your time, and good luck with your remote work. Cheers. Bye-bye.